And now to discuss the film nominations, I am here with our panelists.
Mark Hughes, contributing writer at Forbes.
Sean Gerber with Superhero News.
And I'm Jason Inman, the co-host of DC All Access.
Great, so let's start with the category I'm sure we all really care about. Best Animated Film Release. I'm a Zootopia girl myself.
I am 100% with you on Zootopia. I thought it was the best animated film, not just of last year, but probably the best animated film maybe of the last 5 years. I really thought it was extraordinary. Visually, it's a feast because there's so many different parts to Zootopia to go and explore. But I also thought that the movie thematically, the movie was very, very strong, and it conveyed a very important message with regard to prejudice, and not just in overt examples that we're all aware of, but even casual prejudice, which you kind of discover with the main character of Judy Hopps. So I thought it was not just a well-made film, but also a very, very important film, and I'm glad that it's getting recognition with this Saturn Award nomination, and it would definitely be my pick to win out of the field right now.
Yeah, I'm a Zootopia girl too, so it's my favorite. Animation in general, though, is doing so well now, and some of the best filmmaking consistently year after year is in the animation genre, and I say genre loosely, but yeah, I think there are certain things that make it a genre. And Zootopia is definitely a wonderful one. But I think this is the nominees this year speak to just how good animation has become, and that you get so many different approaches. And Zootopia, to me, was a very character-driven animated film, it used to be rare. It's not so rare anymore.
No.
I'm sorry, but I'm a Moana girl. You're welcome. And
Very well done.
that film was just bursting full of energy, not only giving us one of the most realistic animated oceans we've ever seen in our life, proving to us that Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, can sing, and propelled through the percussion of Lin-Manuel Miranda. That film was a tour de force, and it affected me more so than any other animated film I even saw this year. It is every piece of a Disney movie that shouldn't work, because there's no strong villain, there's no princess in that movie, and the animal sidekick is very minimal, but it works on every beat.
Yeah, Moana was extraordinary. I mean, like you mentioned, the oceanic animation, like all of that was great, but the songs too. I mean, Lin-Manuel Miranda, who of course burst onto he's been around for a while, but everybody became much more familiar with that name because of Hamilton. But then you kind of understand why all over again with the songs that he wrote for Moana. Not just You're Welcome, not just How Far I'll Go, but also Shiny, which was performed by Jermaine Clement. Jermaine Clement, it was fantastic. Everything about that film was just so much fun. So even though I give an edge to Zootopia, it certainly wasn't a bad year at all for Disney Animation to have that and Moana, plus over on the Pixar side of things having Finding Dory.
Well, let's talk about our top nominated film, Rogue One.
No surprise, you take, I would say arguably, but it's really inarguable, the greatest movie franchise in history, and you make one of the best films within that franchise, which is hard to do because a lot of people have such reverence for Star Wars that they don't even really want to entertain the idea that any new film could be on par with any film from the original trilogy. But Rogue One thrust itself into that discussion because the movie was really so strong. And it was an ensemble piece. I mean, Star Wars has always been an ensemble piece, but by taking and this was the first standalone film. This was the first live-action Star Wars feature that didn't really have anything to do with the Skywalkers. I mean, I know they're always present in some way, but they're not really that present in this film. Only a small bit, but it's not really about them. This is about the rebellion. Like the rebellion has only had a few faces in the history of Star Wars. Well, now we added a lot more faces to it. Diego Luna, who of course was nominated for his turn as Cassian Andor. Felicity Jones, who was nominated for playing Jyn Erso, but beyond that, Donnie Yen, Alan Tudyk, all of these actors really came to play in Rogue One, and Gareth Edwards did such a fantastic job directing it, which is why he was also nominated. And it's such a strong film that there were rumors last year about reshoots and all this stuff, so much drama, people talking about the film, but all that mattered at the end was the movie spoke for itself. Especially with a really terrific third act with that whole on that Battle of Scarif. one of the best sequences action sequences that I have ever seen. And it's not just the action, the drama in that entire third act, because the entire third act is that battle sequence, and the drama in it is so great.
I've said before, and I'll say again, it's as far as the on a technical level, on a storytelling level, it's absolutely, it's terrific, great characters. It's one of, as you said, it's one of the best films of the series. I will also say, on a technical level, looking at the directing and the cinematography, I mean,
Yes.
it could have.
Yes.
I really expected it to be a contender for best cinematography. This is the best looking of the Star Wars films, and I think it's probably pound for pound the best made Star Wars film so far. And I'll definitely agree with you that a lot of fans, even people who love the film, tend to be hesitant about talking about a new Star Wars film being something that you can really compare and even rank above some of the original trilogy. But when you remove the nostalgia aspect from it, it's hard, in my opinion, for anyone to make a really good case that Rogue One isn't truly one of the best Star Wars films of all time.
Definitely as powerful as any of the other ones.
I want to talk about a movie that was very powerful to me this year, and one I think is one of the strongest science fiction films, possibly of all time, Arrival. Arrival was this amazing character piece mixed in with a completely sci-fi ending that not only did well in the box office, but literally captured people. I mean, Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner, Forrest Whitaker, and with beautiful, beautiful cinematography, plus an amazing score. Arrival, I think, is going to quickly be a movie that years and years from now, people will still be talking about. People will be like, have you seen Arrival? Do you know the ending of Arrival? And I think it very much so deserves to be in the science fiction category. And I know you guys, you're talking about, we have to talk about Star Wars. I get it, we have to talk about Star Wars, but like, I think Arrival was the film that showed up this year and took everybody's breath away.
Well, definitely has its fair share of nominations, though I have to say, best effects I will still give to Star Wars.
It's interesting. I actually attended an event with the visual effects director for Arrival yesterday, and he discussed how they developed the visual effects in the film. And originally, the ship was going to be a mostly white. They were going to go with the director wanted a kind of a very white kind of thing, and they worked back and forth and talked about it, and he convinced him instead to go with the darker colors that we ended up getting. And the ship, the way that the ship is designed to look like a meteorite almost, or that once it's here on Earth and it's a rock, no longer burning up or anything. And that's the realism and how grounded they are. There are things in that film that I did not realize were visual effects. When they're in their hazmat suits, that's CGI. The scenes of them when they go into the ship and then they're standing there in their hazmat suits, they weren't wearing those actual suits. That's all CGI work. So I already knew the visual effects were terrific, but then realizing how much was visual effects that you didn't even notice were visual effects.
And sometimes those are the best special effects, the ones that you don't realize are there.
Right.
That's definitely the goal, is that you don't really see them, or that you're not quite aware that that's exactly what you're seeing. But visual effects, I mean, it was a feast for the eyes last year, because even though the visual effects were tremendous in Rogue One, also Arrival, but stepping outside of science fiction, what Jon Favreau and his team were able to do with the Jungle Book is something I've never seen before. The level of photorealism that they delivered with those animals, I mean, granted, they were a little bit larger than they are in life, but just for dramatic effect, but it worked. And then also Doctor Strange, and the visual effects supervisor on that was Stefan Soretti, who also did Guardians of the Galaxy for Marvel. I believe he's doing Ant-Man and the Wasp next. He's nominated for an Oscar. I think all these ones that we're talking about so far, well, at least Rogue One, Doctor Strange, and Jungle Book are nominated for an Oscar. And the visual effects were just outstanding this year. It was something that I think we got to see the visual effects showed what genre cinema is all about, which is showing audiences things they've never seen before. Even in settings that might be somewhat familiar, we still have that chance to be amazed.
It's because you can do almost anything now, and that's for fans of genre films, which is what the Saturn Awards are about. We're reaching that level where you don't have to suspend your belief or suspend your disbelief when it comes to what it looks like on screen. And it used to be that even the best things, when you watched them, it wasn't 100% convincing, and now you can achieve anything cinematically.
Yeah, now you can walk into a Steve Ditko panel, which I never thought I was going to be able to do, but I walked into a bunch of them with Doctor Strange, and if I wasn't walking, I was floating through them with Benedict Cumberbatch. So yeah, it's really extraordinary what they're doing now.
Well, that's why I want to give a mad shout out to Scott Derrickson, the director of Doctor Strange, because Doctor Strange could have been this movie that was either too weird for audiences to understand, too comic booky, you might say, or it could have been just this standard superhero origin. But he did this weird thing where he gave us the superhero origin, mixed it in with these amazing effects and this amazing world and Steve Ditko panels, and created this Marvel science fiction movie that's very unique.
Well, and he did, and I love what Marvel does so often, but I think Scott Derrickson made a very unique choice in this, where he blended it with a martial arts film. Because if you follow Scott Derrickson on Twitter, you know how much he's really a film historian, and he's brilliant in that way. And he pulled those Eastern influences, like he's always talking about Kurosawa films, and not that Doctor Strange plays into that exactly, but just the idea of those Eastern influences on film and the martial arts basis of the story, where they're taking Stephen Strange not just as somebody learning sorcery, but it approaches it in a much more grounded level, where the Ancient One is almost a sensei or a master of sorts in the way that she's teaching Doctor Strange, and also Mordo, played brilliantly by Chiwetel Ejiofor. And then Benedict Cumberbatch, like, there were people who said, well, that's an obvious casting choice for Doctor Strange. Yeah, because he was built for it, and why fight that? And of course, he showed exactly why he was such a natural choice for the character, and did a fantastic job with his performance.
Indeed. I think the only other person you can say was better built for their character would probably be Ryan Reynolds with Deadpool.
Yeah, Deadpool just completely took over at the beginning of 2016, and it was great because it was a movie it was a year that had, I think it was the first time where we had 6 films based on Marvel or DC characters, and Deadpool really started the year off right by being something that was kind of a breakout hit, because Deadpool, and also Harley Quinn, played by Margot Robbie, who's nominated for her performance in Suicide Squad, these characters were very big within geek culture, like they were very popular amongst cosplayers at conventions, but I don't know that general audiences really knew them that well. But both of them connected with audiences, and that was because of what Ryan Reynolds did so well in Deadpool, and of course what Margot Robbie was able to do as Harley Quinn in Suicide Squad. And that's what's great. That's what allows this comics to film genre to continue to live on. Because we'll run out of movies real fast if we're just making movies about the characters that are already popular, like Batman and Superman and Captain America. Like, when you're elevating characters and taking them from being fan favorites in comic book stores to being mainstream icons, the way that we saw with Deadpool and Harley Quinn last year, that's what shows that this kind of genre can live on forever.
Well, and they're challenging, I think, the mix of taking characters that people haven't seen before, and then finding that the real key is giving them something that they haven't seen done with characters in this genre either, because that's, I think, Deadpool, one of the reasons that it was such a breakout hit is because it was so unlike anything we'd seen in the genre before. Same with Suicide Squad. It was very different. I know the film has detractors, but it's a fun film. Audiences liked it. I enjoyed it and thought it was a great film. I loved the home release version even more. And Margot Robbie's character, Deadpool, Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool, those characters were unlike anything we'd seen before as characters in superhero films, and they were in movies that were doing things that we had not seen done with the genre before. And when people talk about the fear of, are we going to have superhero fatigue? Well, I don't think so. I don't think we have to, because the great thing about the source material is that it's so different, and there's such a wide variety of characters and approaches for any given character over time. They've been around for almost 80 years. You're going to find something new and inventive to do with it if you look and you're really committed to that idea, and audiences will always respond to that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no evidence when you look at the audience that there's any such thing as superhero fatigue, because I mentioned there were 6 superhero movies that were based on Marvel and DC properties last year. All of them made over $500 million worldwide. Most of them made over $700 million worldwide, and you had Captain America: Civil War as I think still the highest grossing of last year. I don't know if Rogue One's passed it or not yet, but as again, the kind of the crown jewel for Marvel last year. And Captain America Civil War was a great step by Joe and Anthony Russo, who directed that film. It's just filled with tremendous performances. Chris Evans is nominated for his work in the film. Chadwick Boseman, who was outstanding as T'Challa, aka Black Panther, and then Tom Holland, who, like, everybody fell in love with Spider-Man all over again because of Tom Holland's portrayal. They were just tremendous work. And just real quick note about Boseman, like how everybody's really excited now for his Black Panther solo movie that they're making it right now as we're sitting here recording this.
One of the greatest casts of any superhero film
Yeah,
is being assembled.
Yeah, an amazing cast for that film. But getting back to Civil War, I think Joe and Anthony Russo, and also the screenwriters, Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, they pulled off an almost impossible trick with that film, with the size of the cast that they had, and tying in, I mean, at that point it was, what, 8 years worth of stories in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and to be able to do what they pulled off with that film, I thought it was extraordinary. And you see the way that Marvel has kind of changed the way we think about movies. Some people criticize Marvel films as being like a big TV show. Yes, and? Like, there is a bit of that TV show element because it is serialized storytelling, which is what the comic books always were. So I still think of them as being very, very cinematic, but they do lean into that serialized storytelling. But you can't have a movie like Civil War without leaning into that. So I love the way that the Russo brothers embraced that in their storytelling, and I thought they pulled it off incredibly last year with an amazing sequence of the airport sequence with all the heroes fighting each other, and then of course a much more emotional and a heavier climax at the end with Tony and Steve Rogers and of course Bucky. So a really fantastic job with Civil War last year. A strong year in the comics to film category, there's no doubt about it.
I also want to give a little shout out to a smaller film that many people might not have seen, Star Trek Beyond.
Not the film's fault.
No, not the film's fault at all. But I'm glad that in the year of Star Trek's 50th anniversary, that Star Trek was able to not only pull off a fun action sci-fi packed movie, but also what I think is one of the best adaptations of Star Trek ever, because that movie feels like it's a two-part episode lifted from the second season of Star Trek TOS. And for the Saturn Awards to give a wink to that is amazing. And it's amazing the fact that we're 50 years into Star Trek and we're still getting great Star Trek in that movie. And Chris Pine, I feel, finally feels comfortable in his role as Captain Kirk. And the Zachary Quinto, Carl Urban, Bones and McCoy relationship really, I think, cemented into that place. And not only did Star Trek really give us a solid Star Trek in that movie, it also gave us some new stuff in it, because the design of the Yorktown space station in that movie was quite amazing and something that quite hadn't been seen in a film before, that the idea that you could do this kind of Escher-like design to a space station. So Star Trek Beyond, I think, did go beyond my expectations.
Bam.
Yeah.
And if we're
I love Star Trek Beyond. It's the best, I think, of the new series,
Agreed.
of the rebooted series. And I wish that it had gotten a marketing campaign, which we've talked about at length before. But it's a film that deserves a lot more attention, and hopefully, with the Saturn Award nominations, maybe a lot of sci-fi fans and genre fans will go visit that film who didn't see it in theaters and appreciate it for what it does, because it really is some terrific storytelling. And you're right, it proves 50 years later we're still making movies with these characters and about their relationships and exploring that, and it speaks to how strong the characters are, that they can be revived again and again and explored in very different ways.
Yeah, and bringing up one movie that actually is very, very small, but just touching on the independent category for a second, Hunt for the Wilder People was my favorite movie
I
of
love Hunt for the
2016.
Wilder People.
It was directed by Taika Waititi, who's next doing Thor Ragnarok for Marvel, but also did What We Do in the Shadows. He also did Boy. He was just named New Zealander of the Year, which is congratulations to him on that. That's a great honor. I think he's a brilliant filmmaker and one of the freshest, most unique voices that we have in film right now. And of course, it's not all him. Julian Dennison, who's nominated for in the young actor category, did a fantastic job playing Ricky Baker. Hunt for the Wilder People was totally fresh and original and hilarious, but also very, very heartfelt. And I think that's what that's kind of what elevates a movie like that. It always could have been just silly and weird, and that would have been fun, but when you walk away from that movie, you walk away with that movie having touched you. Like it really is such a sincere, genuine experience in watching that story unfold and falling in love with those characters. It's phenomenal. With, of course, Sam Neill, who's always going to be a genre favorite. So, pairing Sam Neill, a veteran, with Julian Dennison was a great choice by Taika Waititi, and totally pulled it off in that film. It was terrific.
We were going to talk about small films. A Monster Calls is it's not just a great small film, it was one of the best films of the year. I think I had it on my own Oscar, the films I would vote for if I got to vote for the Oscars. And the Saturn Awards proves people like me who don't get to vote for the Oscars, at least, the Saturn Awards is going to represent our views a little bit better, maybe. But I loved A Monster Calls was absolutely gut-wrenching and heartbreaking, and it was just at every level that film really connected, and I love it a lot. And if you haven't seen it, then seriously go see or rent A Monster Calls, because it's a wonderful film, and there's a reason that it's got Saturn Award nominations. It's very deserving.
Something else that was very fresh and very doesn't have the feel of a normal genre sci-fi film was 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Yes.
10 Cloverfield Lane came out of nowhere. They kept it so secret, so small, and then when that movie appeared, my eyes couldn't leave the screen, and it did the best thing because it created a situation where we all would sit here and be like, what would I be like in that situation? Because what would I do if I was plagued by a crazy John Goodman, who is also nominated for a Saturn, deservedly so, because quite possibly John Goodman, one of the nicest men in the world, so scary in that movie, so beyond crazy in that movie. And then, of course, combine it all with, is the world gone outside? Is it still there outside? That whole crux of story that sits there the entire movie being like, is John Goodman lying to me? That is what some would call like the perfect Twilight Zone episode given millions of dollars. And it works, and it proves that you can just do a simple sci-fi story and it can captivate you.
Yeah, John Goodman, I'm borrowing a point from a friend of mine, where just to ratchet up the creepy factor, all he had to do was shave, and that tells you a lot about where his performance was in this film. But then going beyond John Goodman, Mary Elizabeth Winstead was incredible in that film. I again, kind of like a recurring theme of I wish she got more recognition. That's why I'm glad the Saturn Awards are here, because that, the movie was released last March, so there was so much time left in the year. It was easy for 10 Cloverfield Lane to be forgotten by a lot of people, but not by the Saturn Awards, because there was amazing work being done in that film, and to see it be recognized here it's such a great feeling.
It's one of my favorite films of the year. I had it early on when I was discussing possible Oscar nominees for Best Picture. That was one of the films in my conversation, along with Hunt for the Wilder People, and I didn't know if there was a chance that it would get Oscar love, but I certainly thought John Goodman's performance it wasn't even a dark horse candidate from my perspective. I thought he was he should have, by all rights, been a front runner for an Oscar nomination for supporting actor. It's probably the best work that he's done, which says a lot because he's done so much great work. And
Mary Elizabeth Winstead.
And Mary Elizabeth Winstead is terrific in the film as well, and it's such a small, contained film, small cast, but wonderful ensemble. I love the movie, and I'm just really glad to see it getting attention here at the Saturn Awards.
And it defies your expectations the entire time, like all the way up to the end. And of course, not going to spoil it here for those who haven't seen it, but just when you think you've figured out that movie, it completely turns itself around on you, and you have to figure it out all over again, which is really, obviously, that's incredibly exciting as a viewer. Another film that I felt was a little bit underseen last year that I wanted to bring up was also this one wasn't in the thriller category, it was fantasy, was Pete's Dragon. Yes. Another one from Disney. David Lowery directed it. Bryce Dallas Howard and Robert Redford were starring in it, along with Carl Urban. So he double dipped last summer. I thought Pete's Dragon was great. As much as we talk about films that feel fresh, what I liked about Pete's Dragon is it had some of that freshness to it, but it felt so classic. It felt like a timeless family adventure film where you bring the kids and everybody just has a really good time watching a really funny and touching emotional story. And they did a great job with the visual effects with the dragon Elliot in there. Like, it was really great work all around. And I think Disney had a strong year. Like, we keep talking about Disney. We talked about how great their 2 Marvel films were. We talked about how great Star Wars was. We brought up animation. And then this one was, a Disney original based on one of their own classic animated films. So Disney probably had the best year of any studio last year.
That's a really important point. Besides, we can talk about the box office and how Disney's movies and so many of their films are nominated here at the Saturn Awards, and they performed strong at the box office. They had the top 5 movies of the year.
Yes.
And then if you look at the top 12 films, they had 7 of the top 12 grossing films of the year. But something a lot of people don't know is Disney produced the films that Disney produced and released last year, every single one of them received a cinema score from audiences of an A-, A, or A+. Every one of them. And that's somewhat unprecedented. So they dominated the box office, but they also dominated public opinion for the year. And I think that's the kind of thing that Disney is really operating like a very well-oiled machine in that regard, hitting at every level with. And I guess when you've got Star Wars and Marvel and Pixar and Disney, it's easy to kind of say, well, yeah, but they've got all these. Well, that's true, but that doesn't guarantee success.
No.
What guarantees success is telling the right stories that resonate with audiences time and time again, and Disney's doing that. And
Also
they're being
allowing it to be
rewarded
very
for it.
true to the source material.
Well, yeah, and having the IP is great, but it also takes great creative vision, which comes from obviously the directors, but also the leadership. Kevin Feige in charge of Marvel, John Lasseter in charge of Disney Animation and Pixar, Kathleen Kennedy in charge of Star Wars, and all of them, of course, under Alan Horn, who did such a fantastic job at Warner Brothers before eventually moving over to Disney. And it's just amazing what happens, that if you make a bunch of movies that people like, audiences will give you $7 billion in 1 year.
Yeah.
And now for the horror categories, I know Witch was beautifully, stylistically shot. Did you have a favorite of the horror nominees?
The Witch is not just my favorite horror film of the year. I actually put The Witch on my list of possible Best Picture contenders. This is the first horror film that I've seen in years that I actually thought was, this is a horror film that's on par with The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby as actual Best Picture contenders. The performances were all worthy of Oscar consideration. The cinematography was worthy of Oscar consideration. It's such a remarkable film. It really went places that the horror genre doesn't always go, and the whole period setting that they went with it and how much it was ambiguous. For so long you're not really sure exactly what to expect or what's happening, and the characters don't know what's happening, and they're interpreting everything through this filter that they have that kind of controls how they view the whole world and what's going on. There's just nothing else like it in horror this year. That said, there were also a lot of other great films that also were nominated. In particular, Don't Breathe is another terrific film that I was glad was embraced widely by the public and by critics as well. And then the prequel, the Ouija prequel, is a film that if you've seen the first movie, you would not necessarily expect a sequel to come back and not only surpass that first one by such a wide margin, but to actually be one of the best horror films of the year. Oh, I would like to have just a quick word about Hidden Figures, which is one of the nominees in the action adventure category. I know that first of all, I want to say it's such a good film, and
Yes.
It's a movie that actually in polls of the public is the film that would take Best Picture at the Oscars if the public voted at the Oscars. And the Saturn Awards recognizing that movie, I think, is very important. It's a wonderful film. It has some terrific performances.
Taraji Henson.
Nominated.
Nominated at the Saturn Awards. And it's a movie that, at first glance, you might look at it and say, how is that tied into the Saturn Awards? Well, if Apollo 13 would have been worthy of a nomination at the Saturn Awards, which I don't think anyone would ask, would Apollo 13 be worthy of a nomination? It's a film about space travel. It's a film about trying to get the first Americans into space, and it doesn't actually take place in space. Instead, it takes place behind the scenes with the people who were responsible for figuring out space travel for the first time. Not just shooting something up and coming back down. They established the mathematics. They had to create new math and figure out how to get humans off Earth into space and into orbit. And
back.
Yes,
Exactly.
and back alive.
It's nice to see the other end of the struggle, not just what the astronauts
Right.
are going through
Right.
when they leave the atmosphere, but what the struggle is on the ground to make that possible.
I think it makes it a very worthy addition to
Absolutely.
I agree.
and what we think of as traditional action and adventure. If you don't find adventure in the struggle and the fight, not only these women's struggle to be accepted as women and as African Americans in the space,
Yes.
the history of space travel, their lives already, their struggles, on top of that, their struggle in those regards is part of the larger struggle to achieve space travel. That's an adventure,
Yeah.
and that is
I'm
definitely
personally
one worthy,
more
I think,
afraid of
inclusion.
political and culture change myself. I'd rather fight a monster. It'd be easier.
Right. Well, I mean, there literally is action in the movie. There are action sequences during the space travel, but really, I don't think you can look at what the characters are doing in that film and say that they are not on an adventure. They absolutely are, even if it doesn't. Because I think what we're used to seeing is the front end of the adventure. We're used to seeing the astronaut going into space. Well, in order for there to be an adventure, there are these people behind the scenes who make it all possible. And so I think it absolutely qualifies and is a worthy nomination in the category, and certainly a great inclusion for the Saturn Awards.
Another one that I'd like to bring up is one that we kind of glossed over a little bit, is Hell or High Water.
Yes.
Now, Hell or High Water is definitely a very interesting thriller, and talking about going to a world that many people probably don't know about, and that's debt-ridden Texas. And as a person that grew up in an area that was very close to that area, that movie rang so true to me. And it probably Chris Pine's best performance he's ever given in his entire career, as well as, oh God, what's it? What,
Ben Foster.
Ben Foster, and then
Yes.
who's help me out with the
Jeff
chef?
Bridges.
Jeff Bridges. I kept wanting to say Jeff Daniels. So Chris Pine probably gives the best performance of his entire career, as well as the man who plays his brother, Ben Foster, and then Jeff Bridges, of course, playing the classic Texas cop. The cinematography is amazing, and as they're running from the cops, you feel it, and that's exactly what every good thriller needs to do.
And that's the best film of the year for me.
Mine
the
too.
movie that I
Mine
have,
too.
since I saw it last August, I think it's that and Loving were the two films for me. But Hell or High Water in particular, I love that movie a lot.
I love Hell or High Water, and speaking of films that have characters on the run beginning in Texas, Midnight Special, I thought was... I really liked Midnight Special. Again, you can't even call it underrated. It's underseen. A lot of people haven't seen it, and I think it's on HBO now, so it is available for more people to go and check out, and I would encourage everyone to do so. Michael Shannon, we always expect great things from him, and he delivers a fantastic lead performance in this, as does Joel Edgerton, who I thought gave one of the best supporting actor turns in all of last year. And I think if more people had seen the movie, then it would have gotten more attention. It could have gotten him more recognition. But the movie is really, really great. I mean, it's a very old school approach to science fiction that plays off of, a lot of people thought it was kind of it was going to be very superhero-esque because the trailers have the little boy reading comic books, but then it becomes so much more than that as the story progresses. So, and I don't want to say too much more because it would just start spoiling everything that's going on in the movie. But Midnight Special is absolutely worth checking out for anyone who hasn't seen it yet.
Well, final thoughts?
I want to bring up before we go. I want to bring up Ghostbusters because a film that got a lot of attention last year, and sometimes for reasons that were right and for some reasons that were wrong. But amid it shouldn't have been a controversy that the movie existed and that the movie was put out. But for whatever reason, it was. And I think the movie, ultimately, I think the movie was a bit underrated. I enjoyed it more than I think what some of the reputation was for the film. But I'm really glad to see Kate McKinnon nominated for supporting actress because she was just so entertaining as Holtzman. It really was a great performance. It was a character that a lot of people rallied around last summer, and so I was very excited to see her being recognized because I think with the box office wasn't quite what people were expecting for the film, so it could have been very easy for Ghostbusters to be forgotten, including Kate McKinnon's performance. But I'm glad the Saturn Awards were around to come and pick them back up because Kate McKinnon absolutely deserves the recognition that she's received with this nomination.
Well, happily, Saturn doesn't always reflect box office. I mean, normally look
Yes.
at Casablanca. It didn't do a great box office, but was found out later. Austin Powers found life in rentals in
Right.
the DVD world and came back with more sequels. So we'll see what happens next for them.
Another film that I think before we're done discussing the nominees that really deserves a mention. You mentioned Split earlier, and that's a film that I think really kind of came out of nowhere for everyone. And I'm going to avoid saying anything that will spoil it for any listeners. But it's a remarkable film, full of remarkable performances, and it's the sort of film that it proves what you can achieve even on a more modest budget and a smaller budget, and yet it feels so much bigger. And it's because the performances and the settings and the directing, everything about that movie hit, and it's really a sign of a director he's really found his footing again, and I'm excited to see what he does next.
M. Night Shyamalan, I mean, he really proved that with The Sixth Sense and The Village. And
that movie is really carried by the amazing performance of James McAvoy,
Yes.
who proves himself as one of last year's best villains.
Yeah, I think James McAvoy is no stranger to us who are big genre fans because we've seen him in the X-Men films, we saw him in Wanted, so we've known that name, James McAvoy, but I think now a lot more people are going to know it as a result of this film because I don't think horror fans have seen much of him, but this is, I mean, when you look at the box office for Split, they made the movie for $9 million, and it's already well over $100 million at the box office, so good for the profit margins, but also it shows you that it's transcending horror and it's going into a very mainstream audience, and some of those people might be meeting James McAvoy for the first time or seeing him in something besides X-Men for the first time, and they're seeing just how much farther he can go with his range as an actor.
it's great seeing him, like John Goodman played dark guys,
Yes.
who we don't normally see. I don't remember John Goodman playing an evil guy since The Big Easy, way back when, with Dennis Quaid and Alan Barkman.
It's been a while.
Looking forward to more dark and terrifying. If you haven't seen any of our film and television nominations, go and do yourself a favor and check them out. There's something for everyone. For more information on our organization and becoming a voting member for the 43rd Annual Saturn Awards, please visit our website at www.saturnawards.org. The 43rd Annual Saturn Awards will be held on June 28th in Burbank, California, and for the first time streamed live throughout the known universe and beyond.